What I want to do is to look at that phrase in 1 Corinthians 3:15. Here's the way Paul puts it. If anyone's work is burned up, he will suffer loss. What kind of loss? Loss of reward. How do you know that? Because in verse 14, he just said, if the work that anyone has built on the foundation survives, he will receive a reward. Paul is not talking about salvation as a reward. He's talking about a reward, prize, crown. These are words that can be used interchangeably, given at the judgment seat of Christ. Or to put it another way, we are all on the same foundation. Paul said in verse 11, for no one can lay a foundation other than that which is laid, which is Jesus Christ. So, the foundation, we're all on it. The moment you transfer the trust that you had in your good works to what Jesus did for you on the cross, you're saved, and you're on that foundation, and you're there solidly forever. But what we are required to do as Christians is to build a superstructure on that foundation. And that superstructure, you choose the materials with which to build that superstructure. And so Paul uses metaphors. And as an example, he says in verse 12, if anyone builds on the foundation gold, silver, precious stones, wood, hay, straw, each one's work will become manifest, for the day will disclose it, because it will be revealed by fire. And the fire will test what sort of work each one has done. Now, if you could just picture a foundation, perhaps this platform, it's flat. And imagine on the platform, I were able to give as an illustration. I've actually thought of doing this. That would be too much trouble. But suppose I were able to demonstrate this point. Imagine here on this platform a superstructure with different materials: gold, silver, precious stones, wood, hay, straw. And they're all together. And then I take some kerosene or petrol and pour on that little figure, which we call a superstructure, and then strike a match to it. In 5 minutes later, what will still be there? The gold, the silver, the precious stones. The wood, the hay, the straw will be burnt up. Now, if a person builds on that superstructure nothing but with materials like wood, hay, stubble, straw, and that's it, and the fire will declare it, because that's what Paul says. In the last day, the fire will reveal it. How God's going to do that, whether it's Gehenna fire, it'll be supernatural fire, I don't know. But I do know this, that those who have on that foundation erected a superstructure of wood, hay, straw, and when the fire comes on it, it'll be burned up, and there'll be nothing less, nothing left. And this is why Paul says, if the work that anyone has built on the foundation survives, that is, if you have built a superstructure of gold, silver, precious stones, he will receive a reward. This is at the judgment seat of Christ. If anyone's work is burned up, he will suffer loss, though he himself will be saved. Once saved, always saved. But it is possible to enter into the judgment seat of Christ, and it will be an awesome day. It is possible according to Paul in Ephesians, according to 1 John, to have an earnest of your inheritance and not be ashamed at his coming. And John even says that we could have boldness in the day of judgment. This is not because you're a cut above others, but because God has witnessed to you right along that he's pleased with you. And when you know he's pleased with you, even though that will be a tremendous hour, an awesome day, a day of days, how long it will last, you tell me. The word day probably doesn't mean 24 hours. It could take several days. It could take, for all I know, several years. The process of this final judgment. But we're all going to stand there and we're going to give an account. You see, when Paul said, by grace are you saved through faith, that not of yourselves, in Ephesians 2, verses 8 and 9, not of works, lest anyone should boast, he went on to say, we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. And so whereas works have nothing to do with whether you're saved and go to heaven, they have a lot to do with whether you receive a reward at the judgment seat of Christ. We are ordained to walk before the world. Jesus says, let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. And so, the foundation is our security in Christ. The superstructure is one of Paul's ways of describing how we receive a reward at the judgment seat of Christ.